How's it going, everybody? Baumgardner here again from The Athletic with another 2023 NFL Draft prospect video for you. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorites, a polarizing guy, a unique guy, and a guy who we'll see where he falls in the first round of this draft. Should be interesting. Ohio State wide receiver Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Son of a former FCS-level linebacker and the brother of a current Major League Baseball player, Jaxon Smith-Njigba actually grew up going by the name Jaxon Smith, but added the Njigba as a hyphenated addition to his last name in high school to honor his late grandfather, who, along with Jackson's grandmother, immigrated to the United States from Sierra Leone in the late 1970s. Growing up outside of Dallas, Jaxon and his older brother Cannon were star athletes in the Rockwall area, with Jaxon eventually earning a wide receiver spot on Rockwall's varsity squad as a freshman. Eventually, Jaxon would go on to rack up an insane amount of catches and receiving yards. He had 287 catches for 5,288 yards and 63 touchdowns in just his final 3 seasons of high school football there in Texas. His career total of 5,414 receiving yards at Rockwall is the 3rd highest number in the history of Texas high school football, which, as we know, is a big deal. It has had books, shout out Buzz Bissinger, movies, TV shows, the whole thing written about it. So, you know, pretty good stuff from Jaxon. But this is actually where the interesting stuff sort of comes in, because despite all of that, despite all of the history and everything else, he was a 5-star recruit. He picked Ohio State over the likes of Notre Dame, Oklahoma, his childhood favorite Texas A&M. His lack of imposing size and sort of average speed had him ranked behind guys like Julian Fleming, who he played with at Ohio State, or Demon Demas, who wound up at Texas A&M. Nevertheless, Smith-Njigba did end up as part of an absolutely ridiculous recruiting class at Ohio State, mostly put together by former coach Urban Meyer, that also featured C.J. Stroud and offensive tackle Paris Johnson Jr., both of whom figured to be top 10 picks in this year's draft. Ohio State's wide receiver room when Smith-Njigba got to campus included, and get ready for this, Chris Olave, maybe you've heard of him, Garrett Wilson, maybe you've heard of him, Jameson Williams, maybe you've heard of him, and then the following year, when Williams transferred to Alabama, Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe you've heard of him. I think we're going to look back on this group in 10 years, remember they were all on the same team at once, and people's jaws are just going to, like, hit the floor. But I digress. Why are we talking about all this today? Because of this quote from C.J. Stroud, who got to throw to all these guys at one point or another. Quote, "Jaxon is the best route runner I've ever played with in my life," Stroud said during the duo's time together in Columbus. Smith-Njigba falls into the always interesting category of a football prospect who is really nowhere near overwhelming from a physical testing standpoint, but has natural, disciplined, and well-crafted skills that translate to the field in a huge way. He didn't run at the Combine, but did log a 4.52 second 40, which is actually better than I think many thought he would run at his pro day at Ohio State. He's not overly powerful, he played almost exclusively in the slot, and he's really only had 1 full season of work at Ohio State due to injury. So how does he make all of this work, and why are we talking about him as the possible first receiver off the board in this year's class? As Dane Brugler put it when he was talking about Bryce Young, he called Bryce Young the Steph Curry of quarterback prospects. I'm going to borrow from the great Dane Brugler here and say, if that's the case, then Jaxon Smith-Njigba is the Luka, albeit a smaller version, of wide receiver prospects. On the field or on a track, Smith-Njigba's raw speed is more or less just kind of okay. It's average. His 4.52 at Ohio State also came with the 1.65 10-yard split, which really isn't very good. And his flying 20 of 2.61 was better, but it's not really what we would call great. However, Smith-Njigba's agility scores are about as good as you can get. He did log the impressive 10.5 broad jump at the Combine, showing good explosion, but the 6.573 cone and the 3.93 short shuttle times are really what defines Smith-Njigba as a football player. The 3-cone score tied for the 10th best ever by a wide receiver at the NFL Combine. The short shuttle was the 4th best number ever recorded, 1/100th of a second faster than Odell Beckham Jr.'s 3.94 in 2014. On the field, Smith-Njigba doesn't really run so much as he kind of like floats. He controls the pace at which defenders cover him, just like an amazing point guard who is able to keep the ball on a string and keep defenders guessing on their heels as a result. Smith-Njigba's suddenness as an athlete keeps corners guessing literally at every phase of his routes, from the release to the catch point. This play against Penn State from Smith-Njigba's record-breaking sophomore year at Ohio State captures everything there is to capture about Smith-Njigba, the receiver. If we stop this thing right before the snap, we see he's working against press coverage here, and the defender, number 5 here, is Tariq Castro-Fields, who is now actually a Washington Commander, and he ran a 4.38 at the Combine, which is actually way faster than Jaxon, of course, and it generally is just a better athlete in terms of all the testing numbers. Doesn't matter, though, as we see here, and we let it play, as Smith-Njigba is able to win that release and push himself upfield at least 2 yards before C.J. Stroud really even catches the shotgun snap. From the second Smith-Njigba wins that inside release and puts Castro-Fields on his hip, he has rendered the defender's speed advantage, which was pretty massive if you'll remember, as useless. This play is now being run completely on Smith-Njigba's time. It'll be run as fast or as slow as he wants it to be, and the corner is going to have no idea when he's going to accelerate, decelerate, or just stop and change direction completely. Quite simply, at the college level, there are elite route runners, and then there was Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He runs routes like a player who thinks multiple steps ahead because he knows his speed isn't quite good enough to rely on all by itself. As you see here, as good as this play is, he still gets caught from behind. Great receivers come in all shapes and sizes, as we've seen over the years, from Calvin Johnson to Cooper Kupp to Randy Moss to Jerry Rice. None of them are the same, but all of them have one critical factor in common: quarterback friendly. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, especially in this draft, is the definition of a quarterback friendly wide receiver prospect. So what's that mean exactly? Smith-Njigba catches the ball with his hands, away from his frame whenever possible, and avoids easy drops. Quarterback friendly. He runs downhill toward the ball when he's breaking out to the sideline to make sure that nobody can undercut or make a play. Quarterback friendly. He works back and finds space on broken plays every time, not just sometimes, every single time. He gets his head turned, his hips flipped, and his body open to give the quarterback the biggest, cleanest target he can at really any place on the field. He was a slot-heavy player at Ohio State, however, and that gets brought up a lot. I think nearly 90% of his snaps in 2021 came out of the slot, in part because of who else Ohio State had there, but also in part because he works better there. That doesn't mean that he can't be moved around in the NFL. It doesn't mean that he can't be a vertical threat, because again, being quarterback friendly also means that you know how to track the football. During Smith-Njigba's magical 2021 season at Ohio State, which included a record-setting 15-catch, 336-yard, 3-touchdown day against Utah in the Rose Bowl, 67 of his 97 catches went for a first down. In the NFL, this will likely become his greatest value. The player who can keep your offense on the field with critical catches in big spots, while also keeping defenses honest elsewhere. It's tough to say if Smith-Njigba could be a true #1 receiver in the NFL, because the definition of what that truly means is always kind of changing. Pro Football Focus's top 5 graded wide receivers in the NFL last season were as follows: Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, and Stephon Diggs. That's a group of different shaped, different sized, different skilled players who do things very differently. However, those are the 5 best receivers in the NFL last season. And among the many things that fivesome has in common, all of them ranked inside the top 8 in terms of catches that went for first downs last season. If you are reliable with your routes and you are on time and understand what the offense is doing, you become a 3-down player who your team cannot operate without. This, ultimately, is Smith-Njigba's greatest potential in the NFL. Athletically, he is a more agile, slightly less explosive, slightly bigger version of Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is absolutely a new type of offensive weapon NFL defenses are now having to plan against. Versatile, disciplined, underneath route runners who you can set your watch to on third down or in big moments in games. If Smith-Njigba enters the right system, he could line up pretty much anywhere on the field and have an impact right away. The goal for an offensive coordinator working with him will be to find favorable matchups he can exploit underneath in space over and over and over again. This can create space for others around him while he remains as a friendly weapon for the quarterback on virtually every single pass concept called, even those not designed to get him the ball at all. He's not going to fit every team, and he's not going to fit every role in every offense. So while he's my number one receiver on the board for 2023, and a lot of other people's number one receiver on the board for 2023, I still don't know how many teams would be comfortable taking him in the top half of the first round. So much of a team's opinion of Smith-Njigba, I think, is going to depend on their own current situation and how honest they are with themselves about that situation. There's also the fact that Smith-Njigba's college career really only featured that one season at Ohio State. He was a backup in 2020 on another insanely talented squad and then missed 10 games in 2022, only playing 60 snaps due to a hamstring injury. Beauty will certainly be in the eye of the beholder, and it only takes one team to fall in love with a player, as we all know. It's also very possible some team, maybe your team down there in the teens or 20s, leaves this year's draft with an absolute steal by the name of Jaxon Smith-Njigba.